It's Dr. Ron. Shall we start the program? It's Dr. Ron.
Is it time already?
Yeah, it's 3:30 now.
Okay,
Shall we
well,
start?
whenever you're ready.
Yes. Yeah. Good afternoon, all of you. Turn on your video, please. Dr. Ron, you can turn on your video so that participants can see you. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, all of you. We, the organizing team of the IQAC and Innovation and Best Practice Cell of Tamil Nadu Teachers Education University, Chennai, and Annamal College of Education for Women, Thoothukudi, deem it a great pleasure in welcoming the speaker, Dr. Ron Morin, and the participants to this faculty development program on teaching and research. I thank the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Tamil Nadu Teachers Education University, Dr. M. Panjanatham, who helps us in organizing this program in an effective way. I also thank the Registrar and the Controller of Examinations for their able support in organizing this program in collaboration with the affiliating university. I am happy to welcome and introduce today's speaker, Dr. Ron Morin, an American from Houston, Texas, who currently lives and works in Germany. Ron Morin is the innovator of the graphic facilitation concept of ready-made mind maps that promotes learning and teaching methodologies such as task-based learning and project-based learning, content and language integrated learning, and content-based instruction. He is also the founder of the Business English Special Interest Group Russia. During his academic career, he has held and is holding positions such as lecturing professor for business administration, organizational psychology, coordinator for the Academy of Social and Labor Law, and personal development planner and trainer. Ron is an active member of several teacher organizations such as ELTA, IETFL, BELTA, TESOL France, and TESOL Greece. He is an active contributor to magazines such as Basic IETFL, Belta Bulletin, and the Internet Magazine for English language teachers. Dr. Ron, it's an honor for us to have you in this forum, and thank you for accepting my invite to present in this faculty development program. And I'm sure your session will be much helpful to the teaching community of India. I am humbled to welcome Dr. S. Mani, Director of IQAC and Professor and Head of the Department of Educational Planning and Administration of Tamil Nadu Teachers Education University. I thank Dr. U. Pandian, Deputy Director of IQAC, and Dr. P. Subramanian, Coordinator of the Innovation and Best Practices Center of Tamil Nadu Teachers Education University, for joining us today. They are ready to help us in all times of need, and we are delighted to have their association in organizing this faculty development program. I welcome all the participants for getting connected with us today. Once again, I welcome you all. And now over to Dr. Ron Morin for his presentation on using mind maps for effective learning. Thank you one and all, and welcome.
Thank you, Shamila, for inviting me. And I hope that we can have a very great, informative, and interactive session. Please do not forget that my talk will be based on constructivist approaches to teaching and learning. And as we go along through my talk, I would like for you to please write any questions that you might have pertaining to any of the topics that I cover. Please write your questions in the chat box so that way we can handle those questions or take those questions at the end, so we can have a very interactive and informative learning session today. Well, Shamila, I need to know if I can share my screen now.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, and let me just see how I'm going to get that. I think it's this one, but let me see. Wait a minute. Whiteboard. Let me just. That's actually not the one I want, but let's see if it's this one real quick right here. It's also not that one.
You started sharing.
Yeah, let me just.
But again, it has gone.
Yeah, I need to just get my other screen on real quick. Might have a little problem here with this right here.
Okay.
Yeah, do we see that? Do
Yeah.
you see,
Yes.
you do
It's
that?
your screen is there.
Yeah, well, that's not the screen I want to share. I'm going to stop sharing that one because I'm on several screens here, okay? So I need,
Okay.
I don't know why that's not working that way. Hmm. Mm, nope, that's not the one either. Okay, it's always just something happened to my Zoom.
Oh,
Okay, but I can change it. Just a second. Okay, I moved all of this Zoom. Zoom has somehow decided that they're going to. Okay, now I go over here. Okay, let me get over this real quick here and share screens. Let's go back to this one. Let's hope it's this right here. Okay, and
the same screen comes again. Teaching and learning with TBL plus PBL.
uh, do you see
It's
that?
there.
Okay, and which screen do you see?
Teaching and learning with TBL plus PBL with
And
ready-made mind maps.
do you see a second slide?
Uh, no, only the first slide is there with your picture.
Okay, then that's the one that I want. Okay.
Okay.
It's kind of difficult because I'm working with three different screens here today. Okay, well, let's get started. I would just like to start with something Shamila, do you see that with Sugata Mitri?
For that?
Do you see the slide with Sugata Mitri?
Yes, yes, yes. It's there.
Okay, well,
There.
good. We want to start with that because all of us as teachers, we walk into the classroom, but we walk into the classroom with a lot of experience and a lot of experiences that we had growing up, and a lot of times the things that we do in the classroom actually repeat the way we were taught and the way we learned. And we also have a lot of mentors along the way as we develop as teachers, and we have role models. And I would like to start by saying that one of my role models is actually an Indian, okay? And he is someone that I met many years ago, and he made me start thinking about what I really do in the classroom. And I took a few steps back and started thinking about what I do and how I do it. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. But I would just like to quote Sugata Mitri and say that it's the teacher's job to point young minds towards the right kind of questions. A teacher doesn't need to give any answers because answers are everywhere. And we are talking about online learning. And of course, online learning means the internet, which means that if we're doing online learning, our students, our learners are connected to the internet. And how can we combine all those things to lead students to really find answers to the questions and the challenges that we're going to give them through those questions to come up with something what we call constructivist approaches to learning and teaching? Well, I'd like to answer four questions today, or three questions today. And one of them is, how can teachers move their learners to higher levels of thinking and to take responsibility for their own learning? A lot of people just bunch that up and call it the 4 C's of 21st century learning, but there's a lot more to just the 4 C's of 21st century learning. And the next question I want to, be able to tackle today is, what steps do I, as a teacher, need to take to step away from a course book and course book driven teaching and allow my learners to take over that online language learning experience and that online classroom that we're managing? And the third question is, how can teachers move from traditional instructional approaches, which are very teacher centered, to more student driven approaches that create independent, responsible, and self directed learners? Well, this webinar is going to take my participants, you, the teachers who are here today, on a step-by-step journey into my world of 21st century constructivist teaching and learning for an online world. Well, let's just get right to it. And I think the easiest way to start it is by trying to find a definition of constructivism. And, you know, I always search for good definitions, and this is one of the best definitions that I found for myself that works for me and works for what we're going to talk about today. And that is that constructivism is an approach to learning that holds that people actively construct or make their own knowledge, and that reality is determined by the experiences of the learners. But that leads to another question as well. And what is that reality? And are we in touch with that reality? And are we leading our learners on a very positive and constructive language learning experience? Well, you know, in order to go a little bit deeper into that, we have to look and compare really instructivism to constructivism. And now this is my sort of put together patchwork definition of instructivism and constructivism from my own 30 years of teaching experience. And, you know, I look at instructivism as, you know, a teacher or it's very teacher and institutional centered, where the policymakers and power holders that, you know, who hold the control and over the processes and resources and the conditions for a learner's success. Here, where the learner is simply an end user of predetermined outcomes, and the main stakeholders, the learners themselves, okay, are not part of the decision-making process, and learner agency is indirectly suppressed. So that means we're really not integrating voice and choice into the learning process. We make all the decisions for the learners, and the learners, again, here just become end users of what we're doing with them. And so, you know, we do have to ask ourselves the question, why are we losing learners? You know, and how are we engaging learners to stay motivated and want to come to class? Well, when they see that there's a point to the learning, where they see where the learning is going to, and they have very clear graphic facilitation that's going to help them to understand what the learning is all about, well, then, you know, we're going to get to more constructivist ways of teaching. And constructivism is really where a teacher takes on different roles, and not just as a teacher in frontal learning, because we know from our online language learning experiences that frontal learning is not one of those approaches that's going to work very well in the online classroom. And we are talking about online learning. So we as teachers had to take different roles, and sometimes those roles are going to be as facilitator and coach. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes, where we pair students with peers, and we do peer learning and peer teaching as well. And connecting learners with the processes that are going on through those graphic facilitation that I'm going to show you. And at key moments, you know, it's important for us to, you know, when we step aside, to become good observers of what's going on, because while the students are working and working towards in a very focused way to complete the clear goals and challenges that we've given them, we also help them to develop personal learning pathways and personal strategies that they will find meaningful. And one of the things that a lot of teachers fear when they hear the word constructivism is that they really don't know how to move there. That's still sort of an unknown field for them, but it's really not that hard. And I myself have gone through many, many years of trying to find an easy way to help teachers to step into that world and see the beauty and the wonderful outcomes that can be achieved through approaching using constructivist approaches to learning, whether it be face-to-face or online. But one of the things that comes to the forefront in constructivist teaching and learning is that our classroom management skills will come to the forefront, And this is where many teachers will have a problem because they don't know how to manage that online language learning experience. Well, we're teachers, and that's what we do. We teach. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I think we have to strive to be good teachers. But we also, as I say here, have to step aside and take on the different roles that teachers should be taking on in that online language learning experience. So again, nobody's saying that instructivist approach, or what we call traditional approaches to learning, is bad, because we will never stop being teachers. And we have to remember that we are teachers, but we also take on different roles. And here, when you look at this model of instruction, you will see in the very small little bubble where that frontal learning is taking place, that instructivist approach to teaching, where again we make all the decisions for the learners. And another thing that we do as teachers sometimes is that we learn for the learners. We give them the answers. But constructivist approaches means that we have to start modeling and scaffolding in a totally different way. And we have to nudge and prompt by using the inquiry-based approach, and also incorporating formative assessment into what we're doing, so that the students see that they're working towards something. And formative assessment means also that there's going to be feedback. And we need to have formative assessment feedback loops integrated into what we're doing online. So this is where we're building that constructivist approach to learning. And of course, we always use TBL and PBL because that is one of the best ways to incorporate constructivist approaches to learning. And again, whether that be face-to-face or online. And we want to help them to, like, as I said, integrate meaningful learning into that. So we want to approach it, as I said here, with open questions, complex problems, issues, take a holistic approach, and use authentic tasks that they see put value on and that they know that they will be able to use. And we want to move the learner to initiate, to choose and direct their learning. And we as teachers are just facilitating the whole process. And that is one of the things that's really important, is for us to start accepting that constructivist learning and teaching means that we do have to see ourselves not just as a teacher, but as a facilitator of the learning process, and not just a facilitator of the learning process, because there's other things that are going on during a constructivist oriented language learning experience. And that is that we also are acting as coaches and mentors. Now, I always approach my constructivist learning cycles with, of course, the methodology of TBL and PBL, but I add that little extra, and that is I use graphic facilitation. Of course, what you're seeing here is just an example of graphic facilitation, but it's a graphic facilitation of what's going on within a learning cycle. And again, here we're talking about online learning. So I use mind maps to start that, because that's going to give direction to that learning cycle. And it's going to help students to understand what's going on, understand some of the questions that we're going to throw at them, and the challenges that come with those questions that have been integrated into the graphic facilitation, which I use. Now, what we want to do is we want to show the students the potential that they have. And of course, we're only going to be able to do that using a constructivist approach, by challenging them. But through these challenges that we're going to give them, they need to know that we're supporting them, that we're going to be there for them, and also to accept the fact that as we throw these questions at them, as we present them with these graphic facilitations to steer the language learning experience, that we're going to probably put them out of their comfort zone, and that might make them feel a little bit uncomfortable. But with all constructivist approaches, we need to stay focused on the goal, and of course, knowing that we're doing TBL and PBL, we also need to be focused on the fact that true TBL and true PBL within a learning cycle does mean that the students will create a product which will be assessed during a formative assessment loop, which I will show you what that is. And another thing is that, again, we're facilitators, we're coaches, we're mentors, but we're also trainers. Now, we cannot ask our students to do something that we cannot do, and that is very important to accept. But if we're asking our students to create a PowerPoint presentation and they don't know how, then that's when we have to step aside from being a teacher, a coach, and a mentor and be a trainer and show them how to use PowerPoint. And this works wonderful with online learning. I do it all the time. And through all of this, we've got to keep them motivated. We've got to keep them focused on the goal and help them to see that what they're doing is meaningful, and help them through this language learning that we're doing with them online to always give them some advice to become better, to progress, and give them that feeling that they really are having success, and acknowledge that success. And one of the most important ways, one of the most productive and effective ways to, of course, show them that they're having success is, of course, integrating formative assessment loops within that language learning cycle. And of this, of course, we know that language learning cycles have a beginning and an end, and that there's not just one, there's many in the learning process. Well, one of the things that has become very apparent, especially now with the COVID situation, is that, an age-old problem that has always existed in the face-to-face classroom was that, they're very heavy in activities, but we have to ask ourselves as teachers, what are those activities leading to? Is that really leading to meaningful learning that the students can put value on? And another thing that we also notice from online learning here, again, that age-old problem that has been exposed, is that a lot of online learning is very light in transferable skills and meaningful learning. So we have to learn how to optimize that online learning experience. And that requires for us to flip the classroom and also flip the responsibility and stop learning for the learners. And we have to train our learners as soon as possible to learn how to learn and prepare for the real world that we as teachers, we take that responsibility when we step into the learning and teaching arena, that we should be preparing our students for the real world. Well, now there is something else that really happens during the online learning experience, and that is that while the students start to notice something, and what they start to notice, they will formulate that in a way of a question, and those are called questions of mystery. And we as teachers need to take that into consideration too when we're putting our courses together, because the students might not voice it to you, but we will see that in their behavior. And one of the behaviors that we will notice very quickly is they're not engaged. Well, why are they not engaged? That's probably because they're not getting the answer to some of those questions of mystery that they have. And what are those questions of mystery? Now, over the years, I've come up with a list of 10, which I think are important for us as teachers to be able to approach and find the answers to, and incorporate those answers into the language learning cycles that we will be doing with our learners online. And of course, the students will ask themselves, why are we doing this? What is this leading to? Where can I, where can I use this stuff that I'm learning? And am I just wasting my time? What's in it for me? And students are egotistical and they want something for themselves. And they want to know that what they're doing is meeting their personal goals. So they will ask themselves, what about my personal goals? And let me not forget to mention here, we're talking about teenagers. We're talking about university students, and they want the answers to these questions. And does the teacher have an actual plan for this class? Where's the plan? I want to see it. And Am I really learning what I need to learn and what I want to learn? And why do we need all this tech stuff? And we get a lot of that going on lately with online learning, where teachers are running to find things and apps and whatever to support them in online learning. And maybe we're doing too much of it. And the last question is here, when am I going to know if I'm progressing or not? These are the questions of mystery. And if we're going to do productive, effective, constructive, or if we're going to integrate effective, constructive of approaches to our online classes, we do need to take these questions of mystery into consideration when we're designing that class. We need our students to buy into what we're doing with them. And that means, of course, again, integrating meaningful learning and self-directed learning into the TBL and PBL learning cycle. So here we're already starting to combine constructive approaches, TBL and PBL, but we need that buy-in, and we need it as soon as possible to lead our learners through that constructivist teaching and learning that we're going to be doing with them. And that's what it's really all about. But what is meaningful learning? Now, meaningful learning does have some definitions, and we can say that there's 6 characteristics to meaningful learning, especially when we're using TBL and PBL as the methodology to do the constructivist teaching and learning that we're doing with our learners online. Well, if we're doing active learning, that means learner-oriented, not teacher-oriented, and that it's learner-driven, then we're doing constructivist approaches to our learning and teaching. Are we doing collaborative learning where the learners are collaborating with each other within the communities of practice that we will help them to develop online, and that we're using social media to do that with them? And are we doing constructivist learning in the sense of, are the students the creators of the content, not us as teachers? And that students understand what that product is that they're creating and put value on it and work towards it, that creating that product, and stay focused and motivated through that learning cycle. Another thing, is it authentic learning? In other words, is it topic-driven realia, something that's real for them, something that they can use now, they put value on, and something that they know they'll be able to use in the future. Number 5, is it goal-oriented? Is it goal-directed? And with constructivist teaching and approaches, it must be goal-directed. The students need to have a clear learning plan so that they can focus and that the goals are attainable for them within a pre-given time frame. Because again, we're talking about TBL and PBL, and all TBL and PBL learning cycles have a beginning and an end. The students know how much time they have to create the product and when they will be assessed. And the last thing is, if we're talking about constructivist approaches to teaching and learning, number 6 is probably the most important, and that is performance learning. And that is that we've given them a task, they understand that task, and that they know that that task is going to be assessed at a formative feedback loop, which they already know when it's going to take place. These are the 6 things that we as teachers need to know when we're planning and designing our online learning classes, because our students want meaningful learning. And that's the only way that we're going to get them to buy into that and also get engaged and stay motivated during that constructivist designed language learning experience that we're doing with them online. Well, it comes to the question, what proven methodologies and workflows can we implement for the promotion and integration of constructivist approaches into our online learning cycles? Well, I keep saying TBL, and TBL is that way to really promote constructivist online learning. And TBL is not new. It's been around for a while. And many people, and especially, people who don't live in India, don't probably realize that TBL has been around so long that they don't really know where it comes from. Now, of course, here in Europe, TBL took off when Jane Reelis wrote a book about a book entitled A Framework for Task-Based Learning in 1996. But they forget a lot of times that TBL started in India and was started by a very famous professor in India and moved on to travel all around the world. It was Jane Willis who put that into a book, but it had been around already for quite some time in India. And TBL has been around longer even than the Indian professor who actually promoted that for language learning. And we call that cognitive apprenticeship. And you know, TBL has developed so much since 1996 when it was starting to be integrated into language teaching, and it's kind of grown into a different thing. And there's different flavors of TBL. And the flavor that I want to present to you today, of course, is that the most important thing to know is that the TBL and PBL that I promote means that there must be an outcome. And that outcome is called a product. And that means, of course, that that product can also be assessed during a formative feedback loop. Well, let's look a little bit further into why TBL works and why it works in an online classroom effectively, and why that is probably one of the best ways to integrate constructivist approaches to your online learning classes. It helps to flip the classroom and drives the learning cycle with a meaningful goal. It creates positive learning dynamics. It promotes existing skill sets and develops new skills. And that's what constructivist teaching and learning should be about. It incorporates the concept of design. And when I say design, it means backwards design, because if we know what we want our learners to, what we're teaching towards, and our learners understand what they're learning towards, of course, that helps to really get them engaged and motivated. And it helps them to deal with us as teachers and them with their own personal learning preferences that they have, because we need to respect the learning preferences that our learners bring to the table. It helps to deal with differentiated learning as well too, in a very positive way. And you know, differentiated learning is not just that people have different language levels. It's about diversity. It's about social capital that they bring, and also about inclusion in that language learning experience that they're having online. And it also has to take advantage of experiential learning as well too. And you know, we're talking about young people here, teenagers, university students, and we might think as teachers that maybe they don't have any experience to bring to the table, but they do. And they usually learn a lot of things, and sometimes things that we don't give them credit for. And TBL and PBL help to bring that experience to the table. And it also helps learners to stay focused and result oriented. I'll show you that when I start showing you some of the mind maps. It leads learners to self-directed learning. And you know, there's some cultural aspects that we do have to take into consideration. There is, because when someone comes from a culture where that's very teacher driven, it's sometimes very hard for them to accept constructivist methods, because they've never been allowed to make decisions. They've never been allowed to have voice and choice. So we have to teach them how to do that, and teach them to be productive when we're doing constructivist teaching, because we're going to put a lot of responsibility on them. And it also helps to get away from the course book. And I know that we have course books that we have to work with, but we can use them in a different way. And also, it helps to get away from those predetermined outcomes and prescribed information that's coming from those course books. And it helps the teachers, it teaches learners indirectly how TBL and PBL works, because let's face it, when they join the real world and become a worker or an employee at a company, what is work all about? It's about task and completing task. It's about joining a project and being a team player on that project. And this is why TBL and PBL combined with constructivism is a great way to prepare them for real life. And of course, it helps us as teachers to move from instructivism to constructivism. And again, that means taking 2 steps back and looking how we design a class, how we put it together, how we put those formative assessment loops together, and it helps our learners to become the creators, because that's what TBL and PBL is all about. Again, if we're doing TBL and PBL, we need to know that our learners need to know that they will be creating products. And there's so many different kinds of products that can be created, and we'll talk about that. Well, let's look at one of just many of the workflows that I create for my students. This is right here for my young learners and my university students. I, of course, design the courses, and I make sure that I integrate all the skills that I want my learners to learn, because this is constructivist teaching, is where I know what I'm teaching towards, but my learners need to know what they're learning towards. And here, I want to make sure that I'm building learner awareness and skills development. I want to teach towards meaningful skills development, and I want to engage my learners into their own self-development and take responsibility for that self-development. But they only will be able to understand that when they see something very simple. I do use a lot of graphic facilitation. I show my students this right at the beginning of the course and help them to understand that experience that I'm going to guide them through, and help them to be proud of what they're doing, and buy into that, so that they see at some point they're going to, have to perform something. That's performance-based learning. And here I try to keep it simple with my B1 and B2 and C1 learners. I don't want to make it too complicated, but they also need to know how they're going to be assessed. And of course, when we're assessing people, we need to use objective criteria to assess them. And I use the European Framework for Languages. This is where I take this from. These are the 5 points that I give them feedback on when they're presenting the products that they create during these TBL and PBL learning cycles. Well, during an assessment, they need to know exactly how to act and how it's going to work. So this is another graphic facilitation that I introduce them to right at the beginning. And if they have any questions, they can ask me there. But I know that I'm going to have to show this to them again and again and again. Let's face it, whereas teachers, we know that we do have to repeat things again and again. Some people need a few times to understand what's really going on. There's nothing wrong with that. That's when we become teachers, and we have to always go back and teach them that what they're learning is leading to something. And in order for them to have success and feel successful, they also have to understand how the assessment is going to work. TBL and PBL does not work without assessment. It's not TBL, it's not PBL when we do not have some kind of overview that the students understand of how the process is going to work. Well, we need to start preparing those learners for what's going to be happening. And of course, as I said, I use graphic facilitation throughout the learning cycle to help them to easily understand, buy in, get on board, get engaged, stay motivated, stay focused. And we need also to get them to understand how those formative assessment loops are going to take place and what we want from them. But we also need to make sure that they're buying into that constructivist approach that we're going to be using during the TBL and PBL cycles. Well, where does it really all start? It starts with us as the teacher, and it starts with us getting in touch with our Tpack and knowing what Tpack is. And Tpack is the acronym for technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge. Now, if you want more information about what Tpack is, all you have to do is Google it. You'll find a lot of information. But again, we're talking about constructivist approaches, and we're talking about online learning. We're talking about trying to get our learners engaged. And now with the COVID situation, we sort of scrambled to try to get our Tpack into balance. But It's only going to be successful when we take a step back, ask ourselves the question, what's my Tpack? And reflect on the answer. Now, this is what we've seen going on in the last 6 months, is that teachers get all frustrated about, oh my God, I've got to get my technology together. You know, what is it going to be? I don't know what to use. And, you know, there's all these gurus telling us that if we use this and if we use that app, it's going to make us successful and it's going to be effective. And what we see here is a confused teacher. And if the teacher is confused, well, you can just imagine how the students feel when we start throwing them all these things that they might not understand. And of course, remember that question of mystery. What's all that technology stuff all about? Well, we got to get that organized and not get scrambled. And I'm going to show you my Tpack. And this is my Tpack. I show this to my students and I go over it with them and I show them exactly what I'm going to use as far as technology is concerned. You know, I use Zoom, of course, I use Moodle, I use WhatsApp, I use Messenger, I use Twitter, I use Facebook, I use MindMaster to do mind maps with them. I use Instagram, Google, Wikipedia, YouTube. I use voice recording. I use Mentimeter. I use PowerPoint, and I use PechaKucha. And I explain to them exactly how all of these things are going to be incorporated into the classroom, because getting the Tpack right means, of course, not doing this right here, but getting it organized and creating on one page all the symbols that you're going to use for your online class. Again, getting that T in Tpack right, because TBL and PBL is not going to work without it. And we need them to start getting engaged and understanding what's going on. So this is why, again, I show them my Tpack, and what's ever missing, what they don't know, I teach them right at the beginning. Because in order for TBL and PBL to work, and of course constructivist teaching and learning, we've got to get that the T in Tpack right and fill in the blanks with our students so that they can already get on board and start learning. Well, the first graphic facilitator that I send to them is this one, because students have to start reflecting, and we've got to integrate metacognition into the learning process, and we've got to get them to start understanding and, you know, reflecting and being able to tell us how they learn. And they need to get in touch with their learning, not just the technology, but also how they learn and how they've learned in the past, because in this way they'll be able to see how they progress. So we get them to reflect, talk about what they've done in the past as far as learning is concerned, and then that helps to build that basis that's going to help them again to see the progress and the step-by-step progress that will happen during that online learning cycle. Well, let's get to it. And again, you're going to see this right here, and that is those 4 formative assessment loops. What are we teaching towards and how do we get there? Well, let's start with the first formative assessment loop, and that is the introduction. And why do we do it? Because in today's world, universities and companies require people to send a video to introduce themselves, and this is a transferable skill that students are going to need. So we need to explain that to them, and the product for this is going to be a short video. Let's use that technology already as soon as possible to get them on board, engaged. And what students don't want to create a video, they already know how to do it. Give them some credit and let them see that we can integrate that into the learning process. And we also want to make sure that we got that right in the beginning. Do they know how to use, how to create a video? Maybe we just need to teach them how to create the video. That's that training part that's going to take place in the beginning. And we can play with that. They can show it to us online. They want to do it. My students love doing it, but they need to be focused on, and they need a plan. And this is the first one that I show them as far as the mind map is concerned. Let's create a CV. And we all know as teachers that we probably do it. And we probably do it as a writing exercise. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. We're teachers. Let's do some writing. Use this mind map right here to get them to do a little CV, create the language that they need. Let's see it as a writing exercise, but that's not the video. because what I really want to do is use this graphic facilitator right here to get them to this right here. And that's the video that they're going to create. They've already been introduced to the language. They've done a writing exercise. We've corrected the language, because that's our job as a teacher, to correct the language, help them build that vocabulary and grammar. And then we just move them to this one right here. They're going to use this as the basis to create that video. And, you know, they're going to, you know, make mistakes along the way. And we have to keep getting them to improve the video. And we're going to be looking at the video, and we're going to be seeing what they send to us. And we'll correct what's right and what's wrong until we feel happy and they feel happy to share that online in our Facebook group that we have formed. And then this is a great get to know exercise that we can be using in the classroom. Why do that boring? Where are you from? What do you do? Let them create a video. Young people and university students find that as a very effective way to introduce themselves to each other in the group. And my students have fun creating that. But let us not forget, we got to get to that formative assessment loop. We're going to assess them, and they know that they will get a grade. Let's make sure that we know what it is, okay? And always use the little green box here. We're going to assess them with task management, pronunciation, intonation, fluency, vocabulary, and accuracy. So once we finish that and they get their feedback, we want them to reflect. A TBL cycle and a PBL cycle should always end with moving the students to reflection. After they've created the product, they presented it, and then they got the feedback from us, they do need to reflect. And I must say something here, it is quid pro quo. I do not give any students any feedback until they give me their reflection first. So they work hand in hand, where the students see that that's the way it works in real life. So that was the first one. Let us move to the second formative feedback loop. In other words, ask ourselves, what are we teaching towards? Do the students understand what we're teaching towards? And let's get into what that second formative feedback loop is all about. And that is, of course, a summary of a text. Now, students will be required to read and summarize text throughout their academic and work life. And this is a transferable skill. Now, we're working with teenagers in high school. This is something that we probably already do with them, but we need to, and every teacher has their own way of summarizing a text. But I have to say, please Google text summaries and different strategies for text summaries. Find the ones that work for you, because you know your learners, you know what works for you. I have my own strategies. I am working with young learners. I also work with university students, and I want to make sure that I help them to create the strategies in order to come up with a good text summaries. Now, again, we know that we have to use the book, and sometimes some of the great text that we can use without doing too much research can be taken from the course book. But I also get my students to go onto the internet, find a topic that they find interesting, you know, something maybe about global issues. That's always a great one to use. Get them to choose a text, show it to me. I look at the text and say, okay or not okay. And then they read the text, and then they give me a summary of that. And again, I have them create a video of that text summary, send it to me, and we're incorporating technology into that as well too. And I can look at it when I have time. And again, this is a great way to do constructivist teaching, TBL, PBL, and the integration of technology. And remember that this is very topic driven. It's also very cultural oriented. So some topics work within some cultures and other topics might not work in some cultures. Well, let's look at some of those topics that I use. Again, I use graphic facilitation to get them to start looking at this right here. They're going to have to use this right here to start creating a writing exercise, but they're going to be talking about their world, because remember, it's about their world. And we want them to start doing this. They think it's a writing exercise and a speaking exercise, but it's not, because what they're actually going to be doing is they'll have to find a text about their local community, and they're going to have to find a text that I will agree with and something that I will agree with that fits to the language level and also fits to what the formative feedback loop will be assessing. So again, we practice with these right here, but again, they will have to find their own topic of improvements to my local community and area. I use status symbols as a topic. We talk about it, online, we try to answer these questions, but I want the students to look at status symbols from different perspectives, and that's why we look at it. If you look at number 2, 3, and 4, that we look at it from a gender perspective. Number 3 is looking at it from a cultural perspective, and number 4 looks at it from 2 other different perspectives, and that is the historical perspective as well as a business perspective. And we want our students to tell personal stories as well too. So this mind map allows them to do that. Now, I want my students to find a text that's going to be related to what we were talking about online. I have to approve every text, and when I see that it's okay, then I'll let them summarize it, and then they can start working towards that formative feedback loop that we're going to be doing. Students can all, higher learners, B2, C1 can be talking about sleep. We all sleep, everybody knows about sleep. But did they ever think about these perspectives? These graphic facilitators that I use, mind maps, help to create some curiosity there and help them to make a decision and decide where they want to do the research, where they're going to find the text. These mind maps have been researched, and we know what's going to be the results on Google. And so these right there, once they choose one of the bubbles, they'll be able to find a text, read that text, and give us text summary. Remember, we're still in the formative feedback loop of doing a text summary. Well, we can use fake news as a topic. Again, this is topic driven, and students, we will need to teach them things. We're teachers, and we should be teaching them things about the real world, and fake news is something they need to know about. This mind map, this graphic facilitator, helps them to do some research, find a text, and do a text summary in order that we can lead them to that formative feedback loop. Again, don't forget that no feedback comes until the students reflect on what they presented. This is a very TBL, PBL constructivist approach to teaching and learning. We must incorporate that, or we're really not doing TBL and PBL in the way it should be. Well, let's move to the third formative feedback loop, and that's interactive discussion or an interview simulation. This, of course, depends on the age of the person, whether there be a high school student or a university student. I deal only with teenagers and university students. I deal with adult learners, but what we're looking at here is also effective for adult learners as well. Well, what is that? Why do they need that? Students need the skill of communicating ideas and transferring information through interactive discussion in their academic and work life. And this is why they will see a need for that, because students need to see a need. It needs to have meaning and value for them. Now, my suggestions to you as a teacher is use the articles from your textbook in order to practice for this, or maybe even use some of the mock exams if you're doing some exam-oriented learning. But again, we can use global issues or whatever we want and go beyond the book. And this is what makes teaching and learning very interesting for me, is that I'm allowed to take that interdisciplinary approach when I'm doing this right here. And remember that this is very topic driven, so allow the learners to choose the topics. But let's look at some of the topics that I use and the graphic facilitators that I use. Let's talk about generation X, Y, and Z, and get students to understand that, and maybe let them choose from one of these generations and find some text about that. Use the inquiry-based approach to get them to do some good research and make some good decisions. And then again, find a text, let me approve the text, get them to read that text, and get them to do what we're doing here in this language learning cycle right here. I also do teamwork because this is something that the students will need to know about when they enter the real world, and of course, when they're learning with others, whether that be in high school or at university. So why not use this topic and integrate that into the task-based learning or project-based learning cycle when we're doing constructivist teaching and learning? We also need to talk about gender and gender roles, and is it really a man's world? And what about women in a man's world and how women operate? Again, these are sometimes themes that don't work in some cultures, but I live in Europe and they work very well. And here, let's teach our learners about the gig economy. And, reality is they're going to be entering that gig economy. And let's talk about job satisfaction. Let's prepare them from the real world, and not just let them enter the world in a very naive way and think that either you're just happy or you're not happy with your work. A person does need to be happy with the work, but what leads to that happiness and what leads to job satisfaction? My students love this journey of discovery that I take them on, and they never even really think about what they're doing because they just find the learning to be engaging. They want to do it. They look forward to that formative assessment feedback loops that we're going to be doing, and they know what they're working towards and they can stay focused. But they always get engaged because they know they're learning something that they're going to be able to, that's interesting for them now, but something that's going to be meaningful for them in the future. Again, we got to get to that point of the assessment. We give them the chance to present, and then we ask them about how they felt about their presentation of their product before we give them the actual feedback themselves. Well, that was number 3. Let's move to number 4. And number 4 is about doing a presentation. Now, here is where we're going to combine many different things. We're going to use technology, but sometimes it's maybe good in the beginning to forget technology and maybe just have them do a poster. That's also good. And they can present that online. I do it all the time. And that's that creativity that students bring to the table. Everybody works differently, but they do have to create a product. And remember that we're getting them to do a presentation. We could choose to allow them to do a PowerPoint presentation, but I suggest doing a poster first and then a PowerPoint presentation. Young students, they start to discover all the little things that they can do with PowerPoint, and they get too involved in the technology and all the tricks and forget about good content creation. And again, TBL and PBL and constructivist approaches to TBL and PBL means, yes, we don't want to stifle their creativity, but we also don't want to be overloaded with technology and get away from good, productive, and effective creation of products. So, well, what do I do with my students? I use this right here. This is probably one of the most effective things. We need them to start learning about the real world. We need to start teaching them about how companies are put together, how they operate, hierarchies, how to really look at a company and dissect that company and learn about the difference between clients and customers, products and services, and how many employees they have, where are they located. If we look at number 4, we're talking about geography. If we look at number 5, we're talking about numbers. And this is a great way to integrate statistics and graphic charts and all the things that they will see when they go to an internet site and start investigating and researching and putting that product together that they will present during this last formative feedback loop in that engaging constructivist approach to teaching language online. Again, we can break it down into market share. What has the company been doing lately, good or bad? We can find a lot of things about companies on the internet. Financial health. Number 9, the corporate image. Number 10, the corporate involvement. This helps to really dissect it and guide that student in that research and curation process that's going to help them to create that wonderful product that they will be presenting at the formative assessment loop. Again, the students will present. We've taught them what to present. but remember that they also need to reflect before we give them the feedback. Well, that was sort of my little bit of take on, that constructivist TBL and PBL learning cycles that lead to effective and meaningful formative feedback loops. Let us not forget that if we're doing constructivist approaches and we want to integrate TBL and PBL, that the most powerful and engaging tool that teachers can use in their online class to steer any meaningful and productive learning experience are graphic facilitation and getting the students to understand it through pictures instead of detailed, complicated, not understandable text that would confuse the students. And I believe that if we lead our learners on a journey of adventure and discovery during their self-development process, and we do it bit by bit and we scaffold that, and they see that in that course design that we have presented them with at the beginning of the class, and that we've taken care of that learning to learn at the beginning of the class by showing them our Tpack, that they will get on board, they will buy into that, and they will willfully come to class, participate, and be engaged, stay motivated and focused. And this is what is really important, is when students see a meaningful connection to the world around them, that they are, and when they feel that they're being prepared for the world that they will be entering. Not only do we get our students engaged, but we get our parents engaged. And we know when we're working with young learners, the parents ask millions of questions about what their students are, what their children are doing. And this is one of the best ways to show parents, show them that design that we did. Make it simple, help them to understand that it's not just about language learning, but it's also about meaningful learning that we're incorporating into the language learning cycles that we're doing with our learners online. This is what we as teachers have committed ourselves to when we join, when we become teachers and get into that learning teaching arena, and of course, helping to develop the leaders of tomorrow. This is my take on meaningful learning, formative assessment loops, TBL and PBL, and integrating constructivist teaching and learning into the learning cycle. I want to thank you for coming today. And if you want a manual that will help you to understand this more in depth, I gladly give that as a PDF. All you have to do is go to this internet site right here and sign up, and you will get instantly a PDF of everything that I said today. And Sharmila, I'm going to turn this over to you now because I hope that we have some interesting questions that I can answer about TBL, PBL, mind maps as graphic facilitation for us to integrate constructivist approaches into our online learning classes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morin, for the 4 pertinent questions in the beginning and the 12 reflection questions with answers. And we are amazed with the Tpack, which you have introduced. And thank you very much for that. And as of now, I have received one question from YouTube. Shall I read out that question? Dr.
Yes.
Morin, shall I read out? Yeah. How to develop divergent and convergent thinking through mind map?
Well, now, actually, the answer to that's very, very simple. All you have to do is go to Google and Google inquiry-based learning, because whatever we do when we're doing graphic facilitation and using mind maps as the way to steer TBL, and we're talking about constructivist ways of teaching and learning. We've got to move everything to a question, okay, and engaging questions. And engaging questions mean that It's a question that the student doesn't automatically know the answer to. An engaging question means that they'll have to research to find the answer to that. And that's how we do that. Simply by knowing that we also, when we're doing TBL and PBL, that we can never forget that it is about the inquiry-based approach. So we got to get some understanding of the inquiry-based approach when we're doing this.
Participants, any more questions? I don't think that no more questions are posted. If you want to ask the questions, you just raise your hands so that we can unmute you. Yes, dear participants, any more questions?
Well, I'm going to just add right here, and let me just go very quickly, Shamila, to I want to put the internet connection or the link to this site where they can get the text that I was telling them about.
Okay.
The text to the presentation that I was talking about today in more detail. It is a text that I put together. The link is there in the chat box. All you have to do is go there, sign up, and you will get a wonderful, it is a 25-page PDF that goes into more detail about what I was talking about today, which of course is entitled Teaching and Learning with TBL and with Ready-Made Mind Maps, and the difference between instructivist and constructivist approaches, and how we integrate constructivist approaches to the online learning experience. And I think this is important. I do not want to oversimplify, the integration of constructivist approaches to online learning, because we do as teachers need to take a few steps back and not forget that it's not going to happen overnight. It is a process. We're going to fumble and stumble. We are going to make some mistakes along the way until we get it right. I didn't learn it in one day. I didn't learn it through a 1-hour webinar either. It took years. I've been teaching for 30 years, but it needs to, some things need to be understood. First, I want this for myself. I want this for my learners. I want to learn how to do it. And how can I learn how to do it? And the first step is signing up for that document, get it, read it, and then start doing some research for yourself online, and all the keywords that you need to do the research. CPD, which is continuing professional development, means that, we want to develop ourselves. We want to learn more. We want to become better teachers. And one of the highest forms of being able to really manage a good online TBL and PBL constructivist, approach to teaching and learning is, of course, understanding how all of that works together. And of course, taking some risk, taking some chances, and just little by little integrating that. But remember, it won't work unless we get the students to buy in and understand what it's about. And that's why I use graphic facilitation, not only to show the students how the learning is going to work, but also the parents sometimes, and my colleagues, because another way of really getting it to work is getting our colleagues on board as well too, and doing some some little workshops at our school with TBL and PBL, and what I just presented here today, and using some of those mind maps that I presented you here today. And I'm going to add another link that I just remembered, that if you want some of the mind maps, you can find them online at my internet site, and I'm going to put that here in the chat box as well. And if somebody can also move that to the YouTube chat. The second link that I gave you is the one where you can find those mind maps and download them to start using them in your online classes, because they are very effective. We just have to learn how to use them, why we're using them, and what we're teaching towards. Remember, they're lesson plans. They're the ones that help the students to get engaged, do some research, create that product, present the product that they created in those formative feedback loops. And again, the reflection that will also need to take place. All of that's there for you in those two links. I hope this has been an informative webinar for you today, and I look forward to your feedback. You can always find me on Facebook, and I ask you to follow me on Facebook. I use my Facebook as a blog to share a lot of interesting didactical and pedagogical articles and things that I find interesting to help my colleagues to develop themselves and get a better understanding of what good teaching is about. Now, again, I'm a little bit biased. So, of course, I like TBL and PBL because I just find it as a great thing to use online. So, again, thank you for coming today. And I want to say that, Shamila, if you ever want me to come back to do some more detailed things about task-based learning, I'll be glad to come. I want to thank you so much for inviting me today.
I do have one question.
I have a question, ma'am. Can I ask now?
Sure.
Even I have a question too.
Dr. Baby, you can ask the question now. Dr.
Okay.
Baby? Yeah.
Okay, fine,
Yes.
fine.
Yes.
First of all, I would like to thank Professor Morin for giving a wonderful and enriching information through his presentation. And my question to him is, sir, how to make the mind mapping effective in an online teaching? And why I'm asking this question is because we usually don't tend to see the facial expression of the learners. So under such circumstances, how do we make the mind mapping effective?
Well, first of all, you do have to ask yourself how you're going to deliver the mind map. Now, while you might not see the students will see you share your screen. So you send that to the students before the class. I suggest sending the mind map to the students before the class. This is the flipped part of learning, where they already have to start preparing. Now, let's face it, we know if we've been doing flipped learning, we know that all the students are not going to do their homework, but we hope that they'll at least see on one picture in one graphic facilitator, like the mind maps that I've shown you today, that they do have to start doing some preparation for the online learning, because here we don't do the research online during the class. We optimize the online learning experience by sending them the mind maps before. So that's one of the ways to not only optimize the online learning experience, but also to make it effective, that the students do understand that their responsibility in this learning process is that they must do their share of the work, and that learning is not just a one-way street where the teacher does the learning for them. They have to find the answers to the engaging questions that we will throw at them and the challenges that we'll throw at them. And one of the first challenges is do your homework. So that's important. That's important to understand. And, you know, we're going to lose some students because we know already, even without the flipped classroom, just assigning homework for some students are going to have many excuses for not doing it. Concentrate on the ones who do, use them as the models. And, you know, good behavior is contagious, and hopefully that the other students see the value of what's happening, buy in, get on board, and start doing it themselves. Remember, we're using the inquiry-based approach to do this. We're asking them questions where they do not know the answers to. They will have to research it, and that's that engaging part, which we always hope is part of what leads to effective online learning. Because
Is Dr. Zenat?
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much for your convincing reply. Thank you.
Dr. Zenat, you can ask your question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Morin, for such an insightful session. My only question is how to inculcate task-based learning in our everyday classroom. Like, what are different activities we can do?
Well, you know, I want you to go and I want you to Google task-based learning activities for the classroom. And you will see that there's a lot of people don't understand the difference between an activity and a task. A task, as I said, my definition of a task is very different than an activity. You know, we can, you know, teachers do Kahoot and use all these different apps in the classroom, do all these activities. But then again, that question of mystery is the students will ask themselves, why are we doing this? So the teacher needs to know, what am I teaching towards? So again, I feel that some of the most engaging approaches that a teacher can use to integrate a task-based learning into the online learning experience is graphic facilitation, is using the mind maps and getting the students to understand how the flipped classroom works. Quit teaching online and create interactive conversations with the students. Let them visualize the mind map that you sent them before the class. And that is some of the activities that they can be doing. Don't forget that task-based learning does mean that they have to create a product. Finding the answers to the questions is not the product. They will have to create some kind of writing task about the topic we're dealing with. They will have to create some kind of presentation that we can assess. TBL and PBL is not complete when the students have not created a product that we can assess. And that completes that 360-degree approach that we need to take when we're doing PBL and TBL, whether that be face-to-face or online. So just speaking about a topic and researching, or first researching it and then speaking about it online, speaking is only the means to the end. That's not the product. Again, TBL is about creating a product that can be assessed. Once students buy into that, then they are participating wholeheartedly in a very constructivist approach to language learning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morin, for such a beautiful presentation as well as answering all the questions of the participants. And thank you very much for your readiness to help us in future also. I want you to help us with our English Language Teachers Association of India, Toothukudi chapter. Soon I will give an invitation for you from our chapter also. Thank you very much. Now over to Mrs. Vinodini Sylvia for a formal Ode of Thanks.
Good evening, one and all. It's again a great pleasure for me to propose Ode of Thanks in this wonderful program. First, I thank Lord Almighty for His grace and blessings to complete this day of the program very successfully. I express my sincere appreciation to Dr. Ron Morin, Educational Consultant, University Duisburg-Essen, Germany, for giving us a memorable and outstanding presentation on the topic using mind maps for effective learning. The insights you have shared with us will definitely help us to ensure effective learning and teaching. Thank you, sir. I convey my gratitude to Professor N. Panjanadam, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of TNTU, for his able guidance. Then I express my thanks to Dr. V. Balakrishnan, Registrar in Charge, TNTU, and Dr. M. Govindan, Controller of Examination in Charge, TNTU, for their support. I convey my gratitude to Dr. S. Mani, Director, IQAC, Professor and Head of Department of Educational Planning and Administration, TNTU, Dr. U. Pandian, Deputy Director, IQAC, TNTU, and Dr. P. Subramanian, Coordinator, Innovation Best Practices Center, TNTU, for extending an unwavering support and cooperation to organize and conduct this program fruitfully. I also express my deep gratitude to Mr. S. Muralidharan, Secretary, Annamal College of Education for Women, and Dr. A. Joycelyn Sharmila, Principal, Annamal College of Education for Women, for their effective leadership and encouragement throughout the program. Last but not least, I thank all the participants for extending an active and enthusiastic participation continuously for the consecutive 4 days. Thank you all. Dear participants, kindly submit your attendance cum feedback link posted in the chat column. Thank you one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morin, for such a beautiful presentation. It was insightful, and we'll follow you in Facebook, and we'll also do mind mapping in our classrooms. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation.
Thank you. And I look forward to coming to India as soon as I can to meet people face to face and do a workshop there at your university.
Please come to us. Please come to our college. We have a guest house in our college. You can stay with us and you can meet our students because it's a teacher education institution. It will be much helpful for us if you come to us.
I teach over 5,000 teachers a year, and I look forward to coming to